I couldn't handle it anymore. I want to go to Mommy, my 8-year-old granddaughter begged, her voice weak, her eyes hollow, and her tiny body frail. I found her chained in the storage shed where I had gone to sort through my daughter's belongings. Sweetheart, aren't you lost? Your mommy, she's not here anymore, I whispered, trying to hold back the tears. I wanted to comfort her, but the pain of losing my daughter was too fresh, too raw. I wanted to see my daughter too, to feel her warmth, to hear her voice again. As my granddaughter repeated, I want to go to Mommy, over and over, I felt my heart shatter. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. In a moment of utter despair, I made a decision. All right then, shall we go to the other side together? I asked, consumed by grief. But just as I placed my trembling hands around my granddaughter's fragile neck, something familiar caught my eye. A memory flashed before me, a truth I had long buried. I froze, my heart pounding. In that instant, I vowed to seek revenge. It feels like yesterday, on Kelly's wedding day, I was filled with joy and pride. I called out to her, "Be happy, darling." My heart was full. I'm Rachel, 62 years old, working as a medical clerk at a nearby hospital. After losing my husband early on, I worked tirelessly to raise my daughter, Kelly, and her younger brother. Kelly was always so kind and thoughtful, much like her father. "Mom, thank you for everything. You must be tired. Let me give you a shoulder massage," she'd say, always finding ways to comfort me. When Kelly grew up, she started an online shop, doing well enough to save a good amount. A few years ago, she married James, an elite company employee, and soon after, they were blessed with a beautiful daughter, Joyce. My son also graduated from university, became a company employee, and started his own life. I thought I could finally relax a little, now that my children were grown and independent. But one hot summer day, Kelly came home with Joyce. Her face was pale, and she looked distressed. "What's wrong, dear? You don't seem yourself," I asked, worried. Kelly hesitated, then sighed, her voice shaky. "It might just be my imagination, but I feel like James has been acting cold towards me lately," she admitted. According to Kelly, James would come home late, reeking of alcohol, and when she tried to talk to him, he would yell at her to be quiet or, worse, ignore her completely. Sometimes, he'd lose his temper and hit or kick her. He even says he doesn't need to contribute to our expenses anymore, because I have my own income. He claims he's saving his share, but he won't even show me the bank book, she said, her voice breaking. "That's troubling," I responded, my heart sinking. "I wonder what's gotten into James. It must be hard for you." Kelly bit her lip, her eyes welling up with tears. She had always been so strong, so patient. Seeing her like this, so broken, hurt me deeply. My daughter was suffering, and I felt helpless. But things would soon take a turn, and the pain would turn into a resolve I never imagined having. A resolve for revenge that would burn brighter than my grief. I gently said to her, "Why don't you try living apart from him for a while? If you want a divorce, you can always come back home. You and Joyce will be safe here." But my daughter didn't agree. "Thank you, Mom, but I think I'll give it a little more time," she said, her voice tired but determined. "Talking to you has helped me feel a bit better. I'm okay, really. I just can't make any quick decisions with Joyce to think about." She forced a smile, trying to reassure me, even though her eyes betrayed her worry. "Besides, James used to be kind. Maybe if I try harder, he'll go back to how he was before. I'll give it a bit more effort," she added, her voice trailing off. With that, Kelly left with Joyce, looking lonelier than ever. If only I had taken her concerns more seriously that day, maybe things would have turned out differently. That decision would haunt me forever. A month later, I received a sudden phone call from James. His voice was cold and matter-of-fact. "Kelly is gone," he said flatly. "What do you mean, gone? That can't be true," I shouted, unable to process the words. James claimed that Kelly had taken her own life by jumping into a waterfall, and she had taken Joyce with her. He mentioned a supposed suicide note, typed on her computer, saying, "I've lost confidence in living. I'm leaving with Joyce." I was in shock. My beautiful, kind daughter gone. But before I could even react, James's words cut me deeper. "I lost my daughter because of Kelly. What are you going to do about it?" His tone was accusatory, filled with bitterness. What do you mean? I stammered, barely able to speak through my grief. This is your fault, he snapped. Kelly became this way because of how you raised her. She turned into such a terrible woman, dragging her own child into this. Isn't that on you? My heart stopped. How could he blame me for this? My mind reeled from the shock of losing Kelly, and now James was accusing me of being responsible. If only you hadn't raised her like that, James continued, his face twisted with anger. And to make things worse, Joyce's body hasn't even been found. I don't care about Kelly, but my daughter Joyce, I just want her back. The pain of his words was unbearable. And then, as if to add insult to injury, he told me something even more horrifying. He had already cremated Kelly in a private funeral and scattered her ashes at sea, all without telling me. It would have looked bad to the public if people knew, he said coldly. How could you do that? I screamed, pushed to the edge of despair. I didn't even get to say goodbye, to see my daughter one last time. The grief and helplessness overwhelmed me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything. I took a leave of absence from work, but even then, the pain wouldn't stop. Every day and night, the images of Kelly and Joyce haunted me. The tears wouldn't stop flowing. 2 weeks later, James called again. This time, his voice was filled with impatience. I need to move on, so I'm going to start sorting through Kelly's things. I'm throwing everything away. The thought of him discarding her belongings like they meant nothing tore at my heart. I couldn't let that happen. Please wait, I interrupted, my voice trembling. Let me do it. Please let me go through her things. James didn't argue. He simply hung up, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces of my heart once again. I wasn't there for my daughter's final moments, but at the very least, I wanted to be the one to take care of her belongings. James wasn't happy with my request, but I couldn't back down. It was far too soon, only a week after her death, to start sorting through her things. It didn't feel right, and I had a nagging feeling inside me. My daughter had come to me when she was struggling, and I couldn't fully trust James's intentions. I needed to see for myself if there were any clues or explanations about what had really happened. Unable to sit still, I went to my daughter's house the next evening. I couldn't reach James on the phone, so I decided to wait outside. The hours dragged on, and even as the night deepened, he didn't come home. Feeling uneasy, I tried calling him again, but this time, I was met with a sudden outburst of anger. It's so inconsiderate of you to show up unannounced. I'm working late today, so go home. Didn't I tell you I would handle Kelly's things? Don't ever come to my house again, James barked. I'm sorry to bother you when you're busy, but Kelly gave me a spare key in case of emergencies. Couldn't I use it just this once? I asked, trying to reason with him. Of course not. Jeez, what a pushy old hag. I'll sue you if you even think about stepping foot in here, he shouted, his cold words cutting through me like a knife. He hung up abruptly, leaving me standing there in shock. I didn't have the courage to enter the house without James's permission, so I started to leave. But then, something strange caught my attention, a foul smell, like rotting garbage, coming from the backyard. An unsettling feeling washed over me. What could that be? I followed the smell to the storage shed behind the house. As I walked closer, a wave of dread settled in my chest. Peering through the small window, I saw something moving inside. It was too dark to make out what it was, but it looked like a living creature. I felt a chill run down my spine. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but something inside told me I couldn't just walk away. I tried to open the shed door, but the old lock was rusted, and the door was blocked with something heavy, like a stick. Determined, I shook the door violently a few times, and finally, it gave way. My hands trembling, I stepped inside, my heart racing. What I saw was beyond anything I could have imagined. My granddaughter, Joyce, who I had been told was missing, was chained up inside the shed. Joyce, I whispered, rushing to her side. My granddaughter looked up at me slowly, her face pale, her body frail and emaciated. Grandma, she said in a soft, confused voice. Around her were scattered empty lunch boxes, some rotten and half-eaten pieces of bread. The smell was unbearable. There was even a bucket filled with excrement in the corner. The sight broke my heart. How could someone do this to her? Tears welled up in my eyes as I gently hugged her tiny, weakened body. But Joyce, with her hollow eyes and fragile frame, didn't hug me back. Instead, she whispered in a voice so soft it was almost a breath, "I can't take it anymore. I want to go to Mommy." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My tears flowed uncontrollably. "Grandma, take me to Mommy," she pleaded, her voice filled with despair. I held her tighter, my heart aching. "Yes, my sweet girl. We'll go together," I whispered, overwhelmed by the grief of losing my daughter. At that moment, all I wanted was to make her pain go away, to take her to the place where she could be with her mother again, far away from this horror. I placed my trembling hands on Joyce's neck, intending to leave this world with her. But then, something caught my eye, the necklace around Joyce's neck. It was the one I had given Kelly as a protective charm. My breath caught in my throat. There was something else attached to it, a key. A key that shouldn't have been there. "Where did you get this?" I asked, pointing to the key, my voice barely above a whisper. Joyce looked up at me with her tired eyes and responded. Her next words shook me to my core. I felt my heart race, my blood boiling with anger. So that's what had really happened. I couldn't believe it, and I knew in that moment I could never forgive him. Not after this. I quickly found a pair of pliers in the shed and managed to cut the chain that bound Joyce. Without wasting any more time, I took her with me, heading to a place where I could plan what to do next. My mind was set. I would get justice for Kelly. I would seek revenge. The very next day, James stormed into my home, his eyes wild with rage, his face red with fury. He was out of control. "You took Joyce, didn't you? She's my daughter. Give her back," he yelled, his voice filled with desperation. I remained calm. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. I've called you countless times, and you never answered. Isn't Joyce supposed to be missing?" I replied, pretending to be confused. James's face flushed even redder, and he yelled louder, completely unaware that his own words were contradicting each other. "You know what I mean. I know you have her. But wasn't Joyce missing?" I asked again, watching as James fumbled over his words, trying to find a way out of the lie he had created. His anger flared again, and he shouted, "You dare call yourself a parent after what you've done to her? She's just a spoiled brat who doesn't listen. I was only disciplining her. Kelly couldn't handle raising her. That's why she took her own life." I stood there, stunned at his audacity. "This is the first I'm hearing about Joyce being unmanageable," I said quietly, barely able to contain my anger. "Of course I didn't tell you. You spoil her too much. That's why I said she was missing. How I discipline my child is my business, not yours." James snapped, his voice filled with venom. He paced back and forth, as if trying to justify his twisted actions. "But chaining her up in a shed? That's not discipline, James. That's abuse. I'm reporting this," I said firmly, my heart racing. Suddenly, James's lips curled into a twisted smile, and he let out a mocking laugh. "You don't have any proof," he sneered, his eyes filled with arrogance. "Oh, but I do," I replied, my voice steady. "I have photos of Joyce, and there will be a medical report, too." I pulled out my phone, showing him the pictures I had taken of Joyce's frail body, the chains, and the shed. Panic flashed across James's face, and he lunged at me, trying to grab my phone. "Give it to me," he shouted, his voice desperate. Just then, someone burst out from the next room. "Stop!" My son rushed in, grabbing James's arm and pulling him back. "Let go of my mother," he demanded, his voice strong and steady. "Why are you here?" James stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "Let me go." But my son, who had been trained in U.S. football during his college days, had James pinned down in no time. James looked pathetic, his earlier bravado completely gone. "We know everything, James. You stole Kelly's savings, and when she found out about your affair, you beat her." "How could you?" my son said, his voice full of disgust. James glared at us, confused and panicked. "How do you know all that?" he spat, his voice shaking. "Kelly told me," I replied calmly, watching as the color drained from his face. "What?" "She's alive," James stammered, his voice barely a whisper, as fear took over. I looked him straight in the eyes, and I told him everything. The truth about Kelly, the lies, and the revenge I was now determined to carry out. When I finally met my daughter, everything started to make sense. The key attached to Joyce's necklace wasn't just a random item, it was the key to our old family home, which had been vacant for some time. We had kept it for sentimental reasons, never imagining it would be used this way. At that moment, Joyce had pleaded with me, her small voice trembling. "Mommy said this necklace was a charm. Mommy is hurt. Please help." Hearing this, I felt a glimmer of hope that my daughter might still be alive. After rescuing Joyce, I rushed straight to the old family home, my heart pounding with fear and hope. When I arrived, I found Kelly collapsed on the floor, barely clinging to life. "Kelly, hang in there," I cried, lifting her limp body into my arms. I heard a faint whisper escape her lips. "Mom," at that moment, Joyce clung to Kelly, sobbing. "Mommy, I missed you." I quickly called 811, and soon after, Kelly was rushed to the hospital. The doctors told me that if we had been just a little later, she wouldn't have survived. Joyce, too, was in a terrible condition, malnourished, and weak, so she was admitted to the hospital as well. Despite everything, I felt a surge of relief and joy from the bottom of my heart. My daughter, whom I thought I had lost forever, was alive. But at the same time, I was consumed by an overwhelming anger toward the person who had put Kelly and Joyce through such an unspeakable ordeal. Once Kelly regained consciousness in the hospital, she told me the full story. It all started when she had discovered evidence of James's affair and his embezzlement of her money. She found incriminating files on his computer and confronted him. But instead of apologizing, James flew into a violent rage. He beat and kicked her, injuring her severely. Kelly, clutching her stomach in pain, begged him for help, but James only laughed and walked off to the bedroom as if nothing had happened. Knowing it wasn't safe to stay in the house, Kelly decided to flee. With Joyce's help, they escaped. But James had taken everything: her bank book, wallet, and phone. With no other options, Kelly and Joyce stumbled through the night for over an hour until they reached our old family home. Exhausted and in pain, Kelly collapsed there, hoping they were safe. Meanwhile, Joyce, trying to help her mother, sneaked back to their house to retrieve Kelly's phone and wallet while she slept. But unfortunately, that's when James caught her. Instead of caring for his daughter, he chained her up in the storage shed. Yet, despite the horror of being imprisoned, Joyce never revealed where her mother was hiding, no matter how much James pressed her for answers. Both Kelly and Joyce were on the brink of death. Kelly was weak, pale, and barely breathing, her body battered from James's attack. Even though they had managed to escape, it was only a matter of time before something even worse happened. James spoke lightly about the situation, dismissing everything as if it were nothing. "I thought they were gone for good," James admitted casually when confronted. Joyce wouldn't talk, and there was no sign of Kelly anywhere, so I just assumed they had gone to the other side. In his twisted mind, he thought Kelly was dead. He had even gone as far as to write a fake suicide note on her computer, making it look like she had taken her own life along with Joyce. But James's cruelty didn't stop there. He had locked Joyce up in the shed, planning to eventually send her to the other sides as well. It was just a marital quarrel, James said with a smirk, as if it were a minor issue. The affair was just a game. Kelly's alive now, so what's the big deal? I was stunned by his callousness. "That's not the point," I shouted. His betrayal, his abuse, his complete disregard for the lives of Kelly and Joyce, it was more than just a mistake or a game. It was unforgivable. Kelly had survived, but the damage James had done to her and Joyce would last a lifetime. The thought of how close I had come to losing both of them haunted me, but now I knew the truth, and I would make sure James faced the consequences for his cruelty. "I'm recording this conversation, and I'm going to report everything to the police," I said firmly. As soon as James heard the word police, his whole demeanor shifted. Panic spread across his face, and he dropped to his knees, begging for forgiveness. "Please, I'm sorry. I'll break up with the woman I've been seeing, and I'll be kind to Kelly from now on. Just please, don't call the police, he pleaded, his sudden change of attitude astounding. I can't believe anything you say anymore, I replied, my voice steady. When I refused to accept his empty promises, James grabbed onto my arm, trying to stop me. If I get arrested, Joyce will be left without a father. Is that what you want? He asked, his eyes filling with fake tears, desperately trying to manipulate me. I pulled my arm free from his grip. She'll be better off without a father like you, I said coldly, unwilling to let him play on my emotions any longer. At that moment, the police arrived. They quickly handcuffed James and took him away, his face full of despair. His days of terrorizing my daughter and granddaughter were finally over. After everything, Kelly divorced James. He was sentenced to prison, and the conviction caused him to be fired from his job. Kelly took legal action, demanding $3,000 for the savings he had stolen, $60,000 in damages for the affair and the injuries he caused her, and $280,000 in child support for Joyce. She also sought $210,000 in damages from James's mistress. As it turned out, James had planned to live with his mistress, but to her, it was only a fling. She had no intention of staying with him long term. When James's parents learned about what he had done, they were horrified. They came to Kelly, apologized for their son's actions, and sold some of their land to help cover the money James owed. They made it clear that James would have to work to pay them back once he was released from prison. Even after his release, James's life would be full of hardships. He had lost everything: his family, his job, and his reputation. Meanwhile, Kelly and Joyce, now fully recovered, moved back in with me. Kelly has started working again and is living a peaceful, happy life. Seeing her and Joyce thriving fills me with joy and energy, and I do everything I can to support them both. Together, we've rebuilt our lives, and I'm so grateful to have them by my side. We are finally free from the pain James caused, and we're living each day with hope for a better future.